Hey guys, one quick note at the top of this episode. Aryeh Schwartz and I recorded this podcast on June 8th, but in the last 15 minutes of the pod, my Wi-Fi went out and we lost the last 15 minutes of the conversation, so we had to re-record it. And yeah, so if you're going to hear a little bit of a transition into into that last part of the conversation, but thank you for being patient with us. I wish we could have got this up yesterday, but I was dealing with some health issues that I'm trying to figure out since last year. So thank you for being patient and to some of you for some of the really kind words and for being understanding. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. So anyways, without further ado, here is me and Aryeh's conversation from a couple days ago. Welcome to another edition of the Skyhook Podcast. My name is James K, and today your other co-host, Chris Pennant, won't be able to make it on the pod today, but I am joined by the one and only Aryeh Schwartz from Winsidr.com. You also know him from the Winsidr WNBA show, and he's honestly the best hot take generator I know. I've gotten to know Aryeh through the Slack channel on Winsidr, and I just enjoy his takes so much. Aryeh, thank you so much for joining me, man. How are you doing?
It's an honor. I always enjoy being on the other end of I'm still on the same end of the microphone, but like not being the host. There's listeners, a lot of stress goes on to being in the host. So be nice to your local podcast host. I'm good. It's a balmy 98 degrees in DC, and there's WNBA season is upon us. So it can't be better than that.
It really can't. I mean, I think that some people in Skytown would object to that so far. With this 2-7 start, but you know what? Let's just go right into it. I mean, I got to state the obvious here: things aren't going so well for the Chicago Sky right now. And to be clear, we are recording this on June 8th, and Candace Parker is set to come back tomorrow night versus the Fever. So I'm totally prepared to eat my words over this. But Aryeh, let's just get into it. Like a 2-7 start it's a 2-7 start, no matter how many caveats you want to attach to the situation. And I know that there are a lot, but this is not what Skytown envisioned when we went into, the season opener on May 15th. What is your level of concern with where this team is at with, I think, 23 games left in the season? Like, how are you feeling about them? And do you think that they can turn the ship around?
All right, I'll say this. I'm extremely concerned. I'm not saying that in the sense of like, bail out of the boat. Let's get going. This is over. I'm not saying that at all. End of the day, like this team needs to make the playoffs. Maybe the expectations move from being a top 2 seed in the playoffs to not getting that first round bye not getting that double bye, maybe only getting a first round bye. I think that's kind of where we're at now. If I'm a Chicago Sky fan, I have high expectations for this team. And as you spoke about, there's a lot of caveats. So I can easily convince myself to say, okay, maybe we won't be a top 2 team. We can be a 3 or 4. Maybe we'll be 5 and 6. I'm not even at the point of saying 7, 8 for this team yet, but there are some key concerns, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
I agree. I think that this team is actually not in the worst position. I do think that if you were to tell everyone that the Sky would start off 2-7, that they would freak out a little bit. They would not have expected that. And a lot of people, including myself, I mean, there are just moments where you think that this team should have taken care of business when they're in a position to really wrap up some of these games. And I was actually thinking
I would just say, sorry to interrupt. Like, that's the more concerning part, right? Like, going into this season, I think the biggest question I had was not, are you going to have a good coaching staff? Are you going to have a good roster? It was more so like the mentality of this team. And I say that obviously as a person who's on the outside. For me on the outside looking at this team, my biggest question was, this team has shifted, and we saw it before the bubble season also. But this team under James Wade has shifted, and I just want to say this, and I know we'll get into this later, but like a lot of people have been throwing shade at James Wade, and maybe I'm biased. I think he's a great coach. Just my opinion, whatever. All I'm going to say is, like, before he came here, if you would have told me 5 years ago, hey, the Chicago Sky are going to be title contenders going into a season, I would have laughed at you. And, well, I wouldn't have actually laughed at you because I'm from Minnesota. But like, I would have not taken you seriously. In fact, I remember Mr. Alter, the owner of the Chicago Sky, or one of the owners of the Chicago Sky, had a quote like right around the time they brought James on as head coach, saying something to the effect of like, this is a championship contending team and we should be contending for championships. And I was like, what is this guy on? Like, do you look around the league? Do you know what's going on? And then James Wade takes over, and it very quickly, he was right? This team has now become that. So back to what I was originally saying, the mentality is, okay, now the target's on your back. James Wade, when he first got here, it was, overachieving what people expected from this roster, getting a lot of value, really squeezing those grapes dry. And now we're at the point where the Chicago Sky have the mark on your back. How do they react to that? And they had it last year, and we saw a strong, like a quick start, right? I think, maybe I'm wrong, they won the first couple games out the jump last year, similar to this year. And then they had a little bit of a trip up. Obviously, the recurring theme also is injuries. But I just think like now it's about, this is a team that needs to find ways to win. I don't care who the injuries are, because that's what championship teams do. So I think that expectation for this team is higher, and that's why maybe some people have hit the panic button, maybe a little bit too early. I think you remove the casing of the button right now, but you're not pressing the button.
I think those are all really good points. And honestly, bear with me with this, because maybe this is just going to sound completely delusional, which is totally in the realm of possibility. But let's just look at the Sky season like it's a game of chess. Like with Candace Parker out, the Sky start off each game without their queen on the board and go into each contest starting off with kind of with a disadvantage, right? But like, even if you, again, just bear with me with this chess analogy. Like, even though you are no longer, like, you can no longer like utilize your best piece, if you are more experienced and more talented than you are when the person you are, like, then you're going up against, you can still win with the remaining pieces on the board. Like, it's still possible. So to bring it back to basketball, like when you look at the Sky and who they've played this season, it doesn't really make sense how they've fallen this far down the standings. Like if they were 4-5, I think that would be a little bit more understandable. But for them to just be at 2-7 with a team that has Courtney Vandersloot, Diamond DeShields, Kalia Copper, I mean, you can just go down the list. I mean, I just think there was a little bit of a missed opportunity here for them to win some of these games that were clearly within their reach. And I think that they were just more talented than teams like the Sparks or the Atlanta Dream. And honestly, this team could very well be 1-8 right now. The Sky almost blew an 18-point lead against the Dream in their second game of the season, and the offense completely fell apart. We haven't really seen it be that consistent since then. There have been some games, especially in the last 2 out of the last 3 games, that looked like they have kind of found some rhythm outside that Sparks game. But this team should be closer to 4-5. I mean, again, you can point to the Kia Nurse shot if you want, I guess, but at the same time, don't let yourself get to that point where you're up late in the fourth quarter and then you blow the lead and let Kia Nurse get that shot off. Like that's to me is where 2-7 just still feels a little bit unacceptable at that. I don't know if that's too harsh, but for how this team has played, I just I don't know. I mean, do you think that's too harsh? Like, do you think that this team should be better than its 2-7 start?
1,000%. Like to what you were saying, right? When you have a more talented roster, or however you want to specifically word it, the Chicago Sky team should have walked away with at least 1 victory versus the Mercury, 2 wins against the Sparks. Now, the Atlanta Dream, I'll actually slightly disagree on that, and only because the Atlanta Dream are a team that I feel like are extremely athletic and guard heavy. And how do I say this in a respectful way? When I look at the Vanderquigs, it concerns me that matchup, right? Yes, the Chicago Sky have the athleticism of Kalia Copper, the athleticism of Diamond DeShields, of Stu. They have so many players who are athletic. Obviously, the most are Copper and Diamond, right? But when I look at this team and I think about it, I could see some uneven matchups for the Dream. And obviously, you have Cheyenne Parker, who I believe she wasn't part of those games. Mm-hmm. But still, like, the team knows that connection, so they're trying to do it for their teammates. They have a little bit more of a whatever. But so, like, dropping 1 to the Dream out of 2, I'm not freaking out about, right? But to drop 4 games, both to the Sparks and both to the Mercury, that's where my concern comes from. Because, and I don't mean offense to the Sparks, but there is no way that this a Chicago Sky team, a team that even without Candace Parker, and here's the one thing, the caveat with not having Candace Parker is that you don't have the other Parker. Everyone wants to talk about, like, oh, well, this team was good last year and the year before, and it's essentially the same roster and blah, blah, blah. So Candace Parker missing isn't that big of a deal, or Quigley missing isn't that big of a deal because, you know, now you have Copper playing better and Diamond. But the difference is it's not the exact same roster. And to bring in Candace Parker, a player had to go. And that other player was Cheyenne Parker. And that's where they've seen a lot of weakness. And also, you know, Aryeh Stevens coming back from an injury, you know, having some restrictions on her is a huge issue also. Like, I have not seen her look as comfortable as she did last season. So yeah, no, sorry, that was a really long-winded answer, but I completely agree with you. I do not think at all that is a ridiculous statement by you.
So when I look at the Sparks, I got to give them, at least through 9 games, I got to give them some credit. I mean, I think they are tied with the Sky for actually having the best defensive rating in the WNBA right now. But at the same time, you look at how that offense works. Like, okay, they got hot. Like, Erica Wheeler got hot. That was fine. Like, Zoe B also had a nice game against them recently. But that's still a team that they should beat. And when you look at how this team carries itself, I think about someone like Diamond DeShields, who we'll get to in a sec. Like, you know what? Let's just talk about it right now. Like, during the stretch, one of the things that I was looking out for was how Diamond was going to step up with Candace Parker out. I felt like this was a moment for her to step into the superstar role and just showcase that she can be the best player on the floor night in and night out. And to be fair too, we have seen moments from her where she looks like this, like the games versus the Liberty and Mercury. She was the best player on the Sky, and it was exciting to watch. But you know what separates like all-stars from superstars is consistency, and she hasn't quite shown that just yet. You know, like where she comes off scoring 26 points and then the next game she, you know, can will the Sky to victory. Like, that's something that I was kind of looking out for, being like, okay, CP is down. One of the things that stood out to me in the media availability, a good media day, I should say, a few weeks back, was her saying, I look forward to returning to being the best player on the floor. And again, while we've seen flashes of that, we haven't necessarily seen that consistently to the point where, I mean, that does kind of worry me a little bit for her. I know that she kind of had a little bit of a redshirt season last year, if you want to call it that. And this is kind of her, if she stays healthy, will be her 3rd full season. But that was one of the sneaky storylines during this Candace-less period where if Diamond was going to rise to that level, like we would see it when the Sky needed her most, and we didn't quite see that. So I'll just throw this back to you. I mean, do you think Chicago needs more out of Diamond, and do you think that she can get to the point this season where she's just scoring a little bit more efficiently and providing a little bit more, like being able to shoulder the load just a little bit more than she has so far?
Well, I would say, first of all, to your point before we got into Diamond, you were talking about the Sparks and their ability to get some wins. I just want to point out the Sparks wins have come against the Indiana Fever and the Chicago Sky. So like, I have a huge asterisk against them. Like they are still like, I believe on, no, sorry. I'm not going to say who I put as the number 11 team in the power ranking, but soon after them were the LA Sparks, because like, yeah, they're showing up against teams that are struggling, and they're not even showing up that amazing. Obviously that one game against the Fever was just domination, but whatever. Get to that later. To Diamond DeShields, a really interesting topic. You know, I want to always be respectful of the players, but she is struggling mightily. You look at, like, we looked at the 2020 season, I feel like, and we obviously, there is asterisks next to her season. I get that. I'm not coming against that. What I'm saying is when you look at the stats, right? Her field goal percentage, maybe not the 3-point percentage, but just her efficiency, her field goal percentage just worries me so much, right? Like she is having the worst in her career, right? She's shooting 36.3%, 2019, a season that everyone considered, right, that she was really taking off. I think Diamond's also the type of player who we have unfair expectations. Athletically, she is insanely gifted and is one of the most athletic players in the league. No question. She has all the talent and all the skills to be that go-to, like she said, best player on the court. We haven't seen that growth from a star level to a superstar level. And that's what's concerning for me because, like you said, it's consistency. And that's fine. Like in the world of sports, how many superstars truly are there, right? Like not a lot. Not everyone's going to get to that level. And there's so many players who, when they come into the league and they have a couple games that are really good, we look at them and we go, that's going to be a superstar level player. Not everyone can get to that level. That's just not realistic. Am I disappointed in how she's played? Yes. And I think I've been on record on air earlier in the season talking about this, where it was like, her shot isn't even off. Or, all right, correction. Her shot is off, but her shot is off in such a minuscule way. Like she's hitting the rim in the back, right? She's overshooting her shot just a little bit. And then she adjusts it and she's undershooting it just a little bit. Like it's not like it's bad shots, right? And it's like, when I look at her game, I look at it and I go, okay, they have to start falling eventually, right? And then they just haven't this season. And honestly, yeah, it's been frustrating. I will say there is a bright spot. She's shooting her best percentage from the 3-point line. Her free throw percentage is up big time. So I like that because free throw percentage to me talks a lot about mentality. And when it comes to consistency, so much of that is I forget, Rachel Galligan always has this, like, I forget the term, but like the 6 inches between your head or your eyes or ears or whatever the line is. Like that's the biggest question for me. And I don't want anyone to take this out of context and say like, oh, Aryeh questions her, whatever. No, what I'm saying is like consistency is that like dead focus ability. Like when you watch Elena Deladon, one of the greatest free throw shooters of all time, shoot her free throw, you could like hit her in the face with a water balloon and she wouldn't notice. She's so focused on that. And that's the type of focus that you need to see throughout to create consistency. And we just haven't seen it. Also, her fouls are up, her turnovers are up. Those are things that are concerning me because if the shot's not falling and you're not playing smart basketball, that can really be a snowball effect.
How much can you attribute that, though, to her? And I said this on our last podcast a few weeks back, that she just hasn't played that much meaningful basketball since. I mean, I struggle to say that, like, what she did last year really counts. Like, I really do think that when we look at, like, her playing healthy, being able to utilize her athleticism, which is an enormous part of her game. Like, right now she's shooting 38.1% around the basket. That just needs to go up. That is below league average according to Synergy. I think about her just playing meaningful basketball. She's not going overseas, she's someone that just took the offseason to get stronger. I'm not going to lie, those boxing videos she had me hyped. But she didn't play that much basketball. Now we're just 9 games in where you're right. Her efficiency is down. She's turning the ball over a little bit more. She is getting the free throw line. I do want to give her credit for that. That is something that was going to be the next level for her, and being able to get to the line more consistently. I mean, she had her second most free throw attempts in her career against the Mercury, I believe, where she got to the line 11 times. Not a lot of players can do that in this league. So I do want to give her credit for that, but you're right. The shot is what's missing, and she needs to be able to figure out in the half court how she's going to really beat players off the dribble, like what moves she's going to be able to just like get to the basket and finish strong, because that is something that's kind of stood out along with the shooting woes. But how much can you attribute her, again, just in this 9-game sample size that we have, to her really not being able to be at full strength playing basketball, we haven't seen her in that state since 2019 against the Aces.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of part of the problem, right? It's that I'm trying to remember who I spoke to somebody on the team about this, but like so much expectations were put on her from that playoff series. Or, sorry, those playoff games. Because it was 2 games, right? Like, I don't know if we can do that, because here's the thing. When you talk to coaches, GMs, and players, you don't want to peak too early. It's something that they talk about a lot. And that was something that Dan Hughes, I spoke with him during the offseason, and that was something that he very much spoke on, where it's like, you don't want to be the best team on day one if that is going to be your ceiling, right? You want to slowly progress and grow and grow and grow. So you're playing your best basketball, because realistically, you're not going to play your best basketball for all 30 odd games of the season and, the more games in the playoffs. That's just not realistic. So you want to slowly ramp it up to a point where towards the end of the season, right? And to be clear, I don't want anyone to take this out of context and say like, oh, Aryeh is saying, the Chicago Sky can be horrible, or a player can be horrible, and then blah, blah, blah. No. Like, you want to have like a bottom level that isn't too bad, but you really want to hit your peak when it matters most. So that's the other aspect that I kind of always need to remind myself to calm myself down. But also when you look at Diamond DeShields and that season of 2019 that we often refer to, of like, she kind of set the bar, right? Like if you're climbing up a flight of stairs and then you hit that plateau and then you continue up the stairs. So the assumption is once you hit that plateau, you're not going down the stairs past that plateau again. I think that can be naive when it's a short playoff spurt, right? What we can take away from that is, okay, this player who all of us had these superstar expectations showed a light, showed a shimmer of that superstar ability. And maybe it was more than a shimmer. Maybe it was a bonfire, whatever you want to call it. But now we can't necessarily say, like, it's that give and take, right? Of we can't necessarily now say that's what we expect from her, but we also, and I think this is where us media members need to kind of check ourselves. We also can't just let her off the hook. You know what I mean? So it's a weird give and take. How concerned are you? You know the Sky better than anyone.
She's someone that, and I have no shame in admitting this, she's one of the hardest players I've ever had to cover, like from high school hoops to the WNBA. I mean, I can't state how much I have so much admiration for her, not just because like what she does on the court, but like she's important to Chicago basketball. She's a very thoughtful person at the age of 25. She makes it really hard on me to give her like the best objective opinion necessarily. But at like the reason I anytime I watch her play, and she has a game again, like against Phoenix, where she gets to the free throw line 11 times. She scores 26 points. She comes up with a few big steals at the end of the game. You see that, and you just think like, oh my God, if this person could just put it together consistently, that person should be a top 7 player in the WNBA. Like there's the way that she impacted the game. She was the X factor. She was the catalyst. She was someone that when she steps on the court, she is the difference between the Sky winning the game and completely losing it. And when you look at the game before that, or the game against Phoenix on June 1st, where they lose that heartbreaking loss. They have that heartbreaking loss against, with Kia Nurse hitting that half-court shot, a Euro step half-court shot that still blows my mind. The thing that bothered me the next game was that she only took 7 shots. Like when you have a soul-crushing game like that, you have one day to recover from it, get back in the right mindset, and then go after it the next day. Instead of having a 4-point performance where she goes 2 for 7 from the field in 34 minutes and she only took 7 shots, like that to me, like look, I am never going, like mental health is such a thing that I don't even want to touch. The thing that I don't know what these players are going through. What's so difficult about these press conferences through Zoom is that you get 2 questions, and then you're building an entire relationship based off 2 questions per press conference. And that is crazy to me. Like, I understand why there could even be resentment towards the media because of that. Like, I wonder sometimes, like, if she gets too down on herself, if early on in the game, like, she's not shooting that well, Like there are times when she runs back with her head down, and I think, no, Diamond, you don't know, like you're so talented. You shouldn't be doubting your abilities, because when you're as good as her, the mental game can just stop you from taking that next step. And that's where my concerns kind of are, like, hey, don't get too down. Like there's a couple examples that I'm not going to use on the MNBA side where once those players are able to figure it out, it's like, oh yeah, now we're talking like them, that they're the max player, and we understand why they got the contract that they did. I think that Diamond, she has it. She's going to be one of those players that I can't give up on, because over the last 3 seasons, since 2018, when I started covering this team, I've just been blown away by what she's been able to do. And there are just moments where you're like, how can this player not be a superstar? And at least, again, it doesn't have to be every night necessarily for this season for this guy to be successful and her to take a next step. But I do wonder sometimes, like, okay, what's going on? Like, how can you score 26 points and, like, again, have the mentality to put the team on your shoulders and take 18 shots in 33 minutes, and then the next game you're only taking 7 shots? Like that to me is the concerning part. And well, I think that
well, wait a second. I would even, like, if you look at the game breakdowns, right? She's had what, 3 games? Yeah, 3 games that she hasn't scored in double digits. Okay. That's the first game against Washington. That's against the Sparks. The second game against the Sparks, and then the second game against Phoenix. And so obviously let's forget about the Washington game. But when you look at the Sparks second game, right? The first game, she drops 14 points. Yeah, she had 5 fouls, 4 turnovers, and she shoots 3 for 7, right? But she gets to the free throw line. The next game, she shoots 3 for 15. So obviously the shot isn't falling, right? And that's something that we've been talking about. But what I like about that game, even though they lose it, is if you look at her stat line, 4 total rebounds, 5 assists, 3 steals, 2 blocks. She's getting active in other ways. Granted, she had 5 turnovers, which I think often come from a player who's more used to hitting the shots and then starts to struggle. Sometimes you try and force it a little bit. You know, maybe you should have taken another shot and you didn't, whatever it was. And then you flip it over to the Phoenix game, right? She drops 26, 7 of 18 shooting. The next game, she goes 2 for 7. So she shot as many times as she made the game before. Okay, she doesn't get to the free throw line at all. But if you look at her stat line, it's 1 rebound, 2 assists, 1 steal, 0 blocks. So that's what it is to me. That's the mental aspect that I kept hearing you talk about, that what I want to see from a player, if you're going to be that superstar, superstars miss shots. Stars, everyone misses shots, right? Everyone has an off day. But you need to put your effort in a different place and say, okay, you know what? My shot ain't dropping today. That just means maybe I'm not even going to get the assists, but that means on the defensive side, or every 50-50 ball that comes near me, I'm getting it. Like, I'm going to find a way to impact the game in a different way. That's what great players do. And that's what you need to see, is that consistency. So I agree with you. You know, yeah, it can be super tough mentally, physically, all of the above, to play a game, have an off day, play another game, especially against the same team.
Yeah.
It can be extremely tough, but I definitely think that we need to see that growth where, and this isn't a knock to Diamond, this is a knock to anybody who doesn't have that mentality of, if this one aspect of my game isn't working, I'm going to find a different aspect of my game, that even if, you know, I'm a little bit off balance today, even if I'm not playing my best game, I can find a way to positively impact the game for my team. And that's the biggest question. But I'm curious for you, like, Diamond gets a lot of headlines. I don't think she's the only player that's been struggling this season. Like, in all honesty,
yeah.
And I know, like, before we talked, like I said, I wanted to talk about this. So please feel free to cut me off about this, because I know we have other things on the show notes. But like,
for sure,
I just feel that the 2 people who have gotten the brunt of the blame for this start has been James Wade and Diamond DeShields. And honestly, I have a lot of bones to pick with that. First of all, I respect James Wade. He's one of the top coaches in the league in my mind. Like I said before, maybe I'm a little biased. I really appreciated, I forget which game it was, in a post-game press conference, he took blame, saying, hey, we played great for like basically the whole game. The last 30 seconds, I lost my energy and I wasn't leading my team. And I take the blame for this loss. I respect that. I love that. When I look at what's going on just across the board with some of the players that we kind of expect to be, putting up certain numbers, certain stats. Honestly, call me crazy, whatever it is you want to say. Courtney Vandersloot has struggled this year.
Yeah.
She's shooting her worst field goal percentage of her career, right? Not by a ton, but it's noticeable. She's noticeably down on assists per game. She's noticeably up on turnovers per game and personal fouls. So for me, it starts at the top down. So yeah, I'm not saying James Wade gets a clear pass, right? Like I'd have to look, because I think a lot of times when it comes to coaching, it's a combination of plays you call out of timeouts, motivating the team, and rotations. And I would say generally motivating the team, he's done a good job, maybe minus that one thing. Plays out of timeouts, I'd have to look. And I'm now blanking on the third thing that I said. but I think it truly just boils down to, like, these players aren't playing up to the level that they have shown us they can play at. And that's not even a Diamond DeShields-esque thing where we're like, we want her to be a superstar, but she's just playing as a star. Like, these players across the board on this roster, like all right, let's make this a positive. Is there a player or it might just be a negative. Is there a player on this roster that you feels like overproducing or is living up to expectation?
Yes, definitely. And that's Ruthie Hebert. I think that.
Oh, yes. Good call.
Ruthie has really taken a jump where, I mean, when we talk about the criticism that James Wade has had as a GM in terms of selecting draft picks, I understand some of it for sure. I mean, the Katie Lou Samuelson pick is a head scratcher, even though I'm still a Katie Lou truther or a Luther, whatever you want to call it. Ruthie Hebert has been fantastic. And I hate when people say we don't talk about X enough, but what she's been doing this season has been pretty comparable to what Jantel Lavender did for that team in 2019. Like, Ruthie's had multiple double doubles. I think that that was someone trying to get up to my house.
No, it's the team calling. They're coming in. They want to dispute some of our claims.
Oh my God, Diamond just found out what I just said in the last segment. No, but the Ruthie Hebert has really taken a really nice step up from, they've really needed her this season. Like, Astu has been up and down as well. You're right. I do. The one thing I want to talk about, though, in terms of Courtney Vandersloot. So you're right. I think she's tied for second right now in turnovers per game in the WNBA with like 4.1. 4.1. Yeah. And while that is troubling, I do think some of that has to do with her teammates not necessarily getting to the right spots or just moving off ball as much as they should. That to me, like, I do think the off ball movement has just not been there for the Sky. Like, someone like Cheyenne Parker and Steph Dolson, like, I think about their roles on the team, and in previous years, they were the Energizer Bunny that the Sky just fed off that energy on the court. And the Sky don't really have that player this year. I thought it was Kalia Copper initially, where you saw the show that her and Candace Parker put on in transition in the first game. You're like, okay, yeah, no, Kalia Copper is going to be, she's not going to be the soul of this team, because I do think that is Courtney and Candace Parker. But what Kalia Copper was doing, like, with the way that she's able to get out in the fast break, like, that to me, I thought that was going to really, like, the energy of this team was just going to be up throughout the entire season, and we haven't seen it. So I do agree with you. There's not a lot of players outside of Ruthie where I can point to and be like, that person is overachieving or hitting the mark in which I think that, like, they're playing to the standard that I think that they should. And I agree with you. This is not about James Wade. It really is not about James Wade. And I mean, the one part that we can talk about, we can just kind of lump this into what you brought up. And the next thing that I kind of want to talk about was the Shyla Heal debacle, if you want to call it that.
It was a debacle. It was a debacle. Yeah, we can call it that.
And the part that I struggle with when people criticizing with James Wade, that I don't think is talked about enough, again, sorry to use that phrase, but I don't know how you could watch the 31 minutes that Shyla Heal played this season and come away thinking, why on earth did James Wade trade her? Or like, why, like, or like, I'm not just like, I'm not trying to be an asshole right now, but like, when you look at what her and Stephanie Watts produced, they were not going to be the short-term solution. And there are a lot of head coaches and GMs in this league or in sports that would, instead of having to face the public backlash of a move like that, getting rid of your first round pick after hyping her up and saying that she was going to be not only someone that could like really take over 10 minutes a game behind Courtney Vandersloot and give her some much needed rest, but also just kind of view her as the future. I don't know how many people would, again, realize that this team needed to win now, needed a veteran point guard, and then jettison Shyla Heal, knowing how much, again, backlash that he was going to face for that move. The Sky need to maximize their 2-year window. And for them to, and for James Wade, I actually thought it was a really solid move to get rid of Shyla Heal. No, and because the team really, again, she looked lost out there. Teams were targeting her on defense. And I actually don't think he gets enough credit for that move necessarily, because the team is going to be better now having, well, hopefully Lexi Brown will be back soon after all the gymnastics that James Wade has had to pull, trying to figure out how to keep this roster that more than 8 players on it each game. But it really is. And I don't think that you can point to James Wade and be like, he's the problem for why the Sky are in the position that they're in, because honestly, I said this before, what was it? In the offseason when we did a podcast, that the Sky need a veteran point guard. They should not be looking to this in the draft. It would be a mistake to put that in the hands of a 22-year-old. And instead they put it in the hands of a 19-year-old. So I get the criticism with that. And I do think that he does deserve some criticism with that. But if we're going to pretend and say that, if James Wade had figured out, had done this and had done that, what are we talking about right now? This guy is the reason why Candace Parker is on this roster. And like you were saying before the show, he was one of the reasons that Vanderquigs took a team-friendly deal, and to make it work for this team. And yeah, the James Wade discourse has just gone all over the place. So I'm totally in agreement with you when you say that people are overreacting to this. I mean, one of the things that I would ask would be is there a better coach out there that you would put in this situation and the Sky would be better? Because when you look at the on-court product and what they've been able to do this season, I don't think any coach could be able to salvage what has happened this year for them.
Well, let's put it this simply. Kalia Copper's field goal percentage is down, right? Courtney Vandersloot, we talked about. Diamond DeShields, something that I didn't get to when we were talking about her before, is her career average is 13.9. That's keeping in mind the drop down that she obviously got from a 6.8 season in 13 games last year. So if we ignore this year, we ignore last year, she's averaging around 15 or a little bit above 15 points per game. So she's below that. So maybe it's not horrible, but all these things add up. When the majority of the players on your team are underperforming, even if it's just an inch, it slowly starts to add up. Now, if you want to talk about Shyla Heal, let's get into this. Let's be realistic. Yeah. Do I like the draft pick? Yes. Do I agree with your take on the complicated issues of a GM/coach being able to pull the cord that quickly? It's complicated. It's hard. It's not that easy. At the end of the day, I think the question's always been posed to me of did he realize he was wrong on that draft pick? I think it's very different, because realistically, if they didn't have all the injuries and then having to use their very small amount of salary cap, and this is going to get into I'm not going to get too deep into the numbers, but just it's a basis of they had injuries, so they had to sign other people for hardships. Those contracts still are money that affects your salary cap. It's not just the salary cap disappears once the season starts.
Right.
Once they had those issues, they were not in a situation with Watts and with Shyla where they could do that, where they could bring on a vet, and they needed a vet. Right. And, some people are going to go, well, you could have had Gabby. Well, first of all, Gabby made it clear, from my understanding, that she wanted out. If she wants out, what's coach going to do? Coach is going to keep her, whatever. No, it's coach's job to get what he can in return for a player. If a player's made it clear that they don't want to play for you, right? Or they want to play somewhere else. Fine. So you make that move. And now look, at the end of the day, kind of just to echo what you're saying and just some other in different words, at the end of the day, it's a really hard move. And I agree with you. I compliment James Wade for making the move that probably he was well aware, okay, if I make this move, I'm going to get a lot of crap. I'm going to take all the heat for this because I made these draft picks. This is what I did. But at the end of the day, she was not ready to do it. And this isn't the NBA. This isn't other professional leagues. And it wasn't a situation where they could tell her, oh, we're going to, like send you off and you'll still be on. Like, we're not talking about Iguapova, who the LA Sparks, she's, if you don't know who she is, you should look her up. Elena Iguapova. She is an amazing basketball player. She has never come over to the W. She was picked up and has her rights have always been designated, I believe, always to the Sparks. But she's never come over and played. This isn't a situation where they could tell Heel, hey, go back over, come over when you're a little bit older, a little bit more ready. This team was making going into the season a push to make to the run for the finals. So if they're in that situation and they go, and I think a lot of people, I think I spoke about this in a Winsidr show episode with Rachel, where it's like a lot of people are going to sit here and go, based on the timing, this is the Chicago Sky pulling the parachute and trying to stop the fall. I think that some of these thoughts and some of these moves were already well thought of before they hit the number 6, the number 7, or possibly even the number 5 loss in this 7-game losing streak. So I think it was a situation of he had to pull the shoot, right? Like he had to do that move. What's the other option? They're not able to sign a vet point guard. And realistically, that's the only thing that's going to stop the bleeding at this point, right? Like going into the season, I think you and I talked about this on air, off air, whatever it was. Like going into the season, the biggest question was, what can this team do when Courtney Vandersloot is not on the court? Can they get somebody to keep them afloat versus all of a sudden the ship starts to sink every 2 minutes that she goes to the bench? That's not going to win you a championship. And they had to find a way to have a serviceable replacement.
Agreed. And I actually think that Shyla Heel is going to be a good WNBA player someday. Like there's not many players that could go who are 19 that are going to be successful right away. I think that's an unrealistic expectation. And you could really feel how much the Sky have needed that backup point guard, even this season. Like the advanced numbers are a little bit misleading with it, but like, Courtney Vandersloot has had to play a career high 33 minutes per game. And that is because they still haven't solved that issue, finding that person in the backcourt. But all I can say is that when you watch that team, when Shyla and Stephanie Watts were out there, they were a worse team. They were a team that didn't look like it could compete at a high level, and that is not indicative of what they are going to be, what they could potentially be in their WNBA careers. I'm not trying to be a dick and say that like their futures are hopeless, but to ask that much from a rookie to step in right away and again have it be this seamless transition, that is really difficult. Even if she did have a training camp, even if she did play,
we didn't even get to training. Like she wasn't there for training camp. You're talking about a player who's never played with any of these players before, going into the hardest league in the world. Like that's not a knock towards the Australian Basketball League, which I always jumble up the initials. That's not a knock to it. And to back to what I said before, like I'm sure if James Wade had the option of saying, hey, we're going to stash you. Like we saw this, it's not going to work out right now. It just can't because of the situation that we're in. We want to stash you. That's not a possibility realistically to happen after you got to see what she could do. And so it was just a snowball effect of like one bad thing happened. She wasn't able to make it a training camp and whatnot. And then it started to snowball into a worse situation. And his hands were tied, honestly. Like you said something about like, could James Wade, if you replace James Wade with a different coach, would they have been in a better situation? Probably not. If you replace Heel with a different player, would they have been in a better situation if you replace her with a vet? Probably. Yeah. So like it's as not simplistic of an equation as this is, it's a simplistic equation.
So technology failed Aryeh and I yesterday. So we are recording this the day after. So right now we're recording 18 minutes before the Sky take the court versus the Liberty, or not the Liberty, against the Fever. And I can report, this is so fun, that Candace Parker will be playing around 20 minutes tonight. Aryeh, let's wrap this up the way that we were, heading towards last time. I'm curious, in order for the Sky to get things back on track, do you think it is as simple as just adding Candace Parker back, or is there something that sticks out to you where you think that this is something that there's something specifically that you think they need to do in order to solve most of their problems? Again, this is what's now 17 minutes before the Sky play the Fever, and maybe Candace Parker does a lot in 20 minutes that completely makes us look foolish. But hey, I'm curious what you have to say about this, because I know that there's a lot of people that are split on this.
So I think they're in a lucky situation where not only are they getting back their best player, but they're also going up against the worst team in the league. So I think it's going to be like a perfect storm for this team. Pun intended, because the Storm won the championship last year. I truly think that it won't be as easy as just plugging Candace Parker back in. But what I do think is when you plugging her in won't make them go from being a bottom dwelling team that they are right now to all of a sudden, being up there with the Sun, with the Storm, and with the Aces, if you have the Aces up there, as I've seen some power rankings do. But it will be good enough to stop the bleeding and start getting some wins. And what I've seen from this team, and we talked about it earlier in this episode, or I guess earlier yesterday, but it will be in one episode, is the progression through a season. Their whole progression has been completely thrown off its axis, and bringing back Candace Parker can put them back on the path, right? Where, okay, we've had our worst basketball behind us. Now let's continue to grow. You don't win a championship in one game. You're not going to get to 500 in one game. It's going to be a slow process, and they need to approach it in that sense of, yes, but the bigger question is not Candace Parker, in all honesty, is the other players around, as we spoke about. It's not like the coach is completely failing them. It's not like one player is completely failing them or there's this one issue. It's an overall team issue. It's players not hitting their expected stats, right? It's players not, playing defensively as they should. I think I saw you tweet out that James Wade spoke about how maybe they've gotten a little bit too complicated too early on in the season, and he threw out like 60% of the playbook. That's really cool and all, but I think the cooler aspect is you can throw out the playbook. You still have those plays when it comes to the last second shots, right? What do they call in the WNBA now? The buzzer beater league, the women's professional buzzer beater league, or something like that. Shout out to Jasmine Brown. I think it truly, this is a long-winded answer, but it truly is going to be Candace Parker comes back. There's going to be accountability, right? That maybe wasn't there before, even though she was at a lot of these games. But there's going to be the accountability of having her on the court and her looking at you and you playing next to her and knowing that she's a WNBA great. There's an aura, a vibe that greatness gives off, a stench that greatness gives off. And Candace Parker is greatness. And I think we're going to see the players on this team sniff that stench, feel that vibe, and vibe off it.
I agree. I actually think the biggest thing that's going to help them out in this respect is the half-court offense, because Candace Parker is not going to let this team be stagnant on that end of the floor. And yes, James Wade threw out 6% of the playbook, and he's trying to make things more simple. That 100% makes sense. But I do think that having Candace Parker back is going to help this offense, like this half-court offense that has really, really struggled. I think we talked about it a little bit yesterday, but, the Sky have traditionally been a really good half-court offense under James Wade, and for them to be last in the league in points per possession in the half-court, I just have a really hard time imagining that that's something that is going to continue to be a trend for this team. I don't think Candace Parker necessarily fixes the turnover problem, where again, I think the Sky have had the second most turnovers in the league since 2019 as well. So this is just something that is in their DNA a little bit that they're eventually are going to need to fix. But having Candace Parker back as a secondary facilitator alongside Courtney Vandersloot, I think is going to, I don't think that when we come down to some of those plays earlier in the game that really decide what happens at the end of them, that is the difference of having a Candace Parker and someone who can, like you just said, have this team breathe a little bit when things start to get a little bit hectic. I think they have panicked a little bit. I think, again, I don't want to, put too much on Diamond DeShields, but I think about that play with Kia Nurse, like the play before Kia Nurse hit that insane shot where I think Diamond didn't know that the shot clock had reset, and she, instead of like taking like 11 seconds or whatever it was to just let the clock go down, she took a quick shot and, gave the Mercury a chance to get back into it. And they did, like it was a kind of a miracle shot. And again, we wouldn't even be talking about that play if, Kia Nurse doesn't hit that shot. But I think about having someone, like, instead of having Candace off to the sideline with her mask on, being away from the play, before the play, that's something that a veteran does, is just make sure everybody is all on the same page. And
totally,
I think that is incredibly valuable, especially when you head back into the season where, they have a chance to really get back in the standings. I mean, right now they're 5.5 games back from first place. I don't think they're going to be a first place team by any means, but they don't play the Storm, Mercury, or the Aces until August. Like and most of those games, like against the top 3 teams in the league, are coming in September. They have some time to actually regroup a little bit and find that rhythm that they didn't get in the first 7 games or the last 7 games of this stretch. Like I think that they have some time to just really find the rhythm, and that's why this team has been so calm during this time, where they're not hitting the panic button. That's kind of, I think that does show maturity, whether you like it or not, if that makes sense.
Well, I think also they're smart enough to know that, like, and I think I touched on this before, but honestly, I don't remember. But let's put it this way. I know I touched on them. Maybe the expectations is no longer a top 2 seed, but when you think about it realistically, 8 out of 12 teams make the playoffs, right? And often with the new playoff, or it's not even the new playoff format anymore. With this playoff format, we've seen that the top 2 teams have a huge advantage and often end up winning it all. I get that. But I do think that if you're a smart vet in this league, you're aware of the fact that it's not, I don't want this to be taken the wrong way. It's not hard to make the playoffs, right? Majority of the teams in the league make the playoffs. You have to be one of the 4 worst teams in the league to not make the playoffs. So I think it's easy for this team to sit here and go, look, we're playing horribly, but are we out of playoff contention? No. And if we're not out of playoff contention, then there's no reason to have our head down. And there's no reason, to throw in the towel, whatever it is. Like, at the end of the day, this team, whether or not they're seeded as a top team, and this is the positive look that you have to think about, whether or not they're seeded as a top 2 team, if they are playing as a top 2 team in the league, it doesn't matter who they play in the first round of the playoffs. It doesn't matter who they play in the second round of the playoffs. It's getting to the series, and that's where it's going to be. So, is that kind of crazy of me to say the way we sit currently right now? Maybe. But, it's a 7-game losing streak. But after tonight, from 9 minutes from now, as we're talking, maybe that is now a 1-game winning streak. And at the end of the day, it's about making the playoffs, playing your best basketball when it matters most.
100%. And if you got to think about the 7-game losing streak with some context, you got to add the context, where they lost 4 of those games by 5 or less points. The way that us talking heads discuss this team can just dramatically change with just a couple more wins. I don't think people are going crazy about the Sky and like, oh, are they actually a contender or a pretender if they're at 4 and 5 without Candace Parker? I do think that the conversation does change a little bit. That doesn't mean we can make excuses for this team, because again, like we've talked about earlier yesterday, just you can't make excuses. They have the pieces to win, especially against some of these other teams. They should be in a better position, but that doesn't mean they can't crawl back out of the hole. And I tweeted out something a couple days ago where I said I think the worst start for a WNBA finals winner through 9 games was 5-4. There's always room for firsts for one thing, obviously, but at the same time, it's like, I think I look at this team, if they just peak at the right time, if they can get Aryeh Stevens to be able to play 30 minutes a game, even if they don't need her for that much time, and they probably won't, just given how much time, like how great Ruthie Hebert has looked, with a Stu Dew eventually going to be coming back in, Steph Dolson now back in the fold. When they're just able to get fully healthy and just, you think about some of the other pieces that a lot of people don't talk about, I just think this team is in a better position than what it looks like right now. And again, like, let's just say that first and second place are not within reach. 3.5 games to get back to 4th place. I mean, come on now. I mean, we're talking about a team that like could just easily go on a run right now. Again, not having to face some of the tougher teams in the league until later down the road. So if all it takes is to eliminate 6% of the playbook from James Wade in his mind, to just like make things simpler, get back on track, and then really, who knows what can happen in September is all I'm going to say about it. But Aryeh, thank you so much for joining me on the pod. Again, technology continues to fail me and Chris, so I appreciate it. But do you have any other thoughts that you want to put out there before we wrap all this up?
No, not at all. I'm excited for the rest of the season for the Chicago Sky team, because they have more than enough pinboard material or whatever the phrase is. And this team, again, like, say whatever you want. I don't think anybody's sitting here and going, the Chicago Sky are not making the playoffs. The Chicago Sky are a bad team. They are playing bad, and there's a really big difference to that. And I'm excited to see what the rest holds in store, especially because a lot of people's expectations are low. And when expectations are low, athletes love to use that and get it going, So like, hey, this is going to be a fun rest of the season for the Sky Town.
Absolutely. I think that it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out. And we'll have to have you back on at some point where you, me, and Chris can all talk about this team, and hopefully it'll be with a more positive tune. But until then, please catch Aryeh on the Winsidr WNBA show. I believe you guys just released a new episode today. Am I correct?
Literally finished recording, published it, and hopped on this episode with you. We talk about players who are standing out, players who maybe have gotten enough attention, or maybe expectations were low and they're exceeding expectations so far this episode. Sneak peek, I call myself out for being wrong on a lot of takes.
Hey, you know what? You're better than most people when it comes to that, because a lot of people just hide behind it. And no, you got to hold yourself accountable. That's why I respect you so much and why your show is so great. And but yeah, definitely catch that show. You can find it everywhere. And also support Winsidr. I think we can agree on that, Aryeh, right?
I think we definitely can agree on that, right?
Yeah. But really, man, thank you so much. And we'll be talking soon.
We will. Appreciate you. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into another edition of the Skyhook Podcast. If you want to reach out to us, you can always do so by emailing our mailbag, which is the skyhookmailbag@gmail.com. One more time, that is the skyhookmailbag@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @skyhookin. It's spelled exactly how it sounds. And if you could take the time to rate and review our podcast, we're available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you could give us a rate, give us a review, we would really appreciate it. And we really thank you for your support. And if you ever have any episode ideas, if you ever want to hop on the pod, we're always open to having fans on. So really, thank you so much for listening in. Until next time.